Today, we are honored to have three speakers from New Mexico and the Bosque del Apache National Wildlife Refuge. Their credentials and experience are extensive. Now I'll give only an overview to save time. Deb Caldwell, who will speak first, is the Executive Director for the Friends of Bosque del Apache National Wildlife Refuge. She has had experience as Executive Director of Socorro County Chamber of Commerce and in a social services agency in Arizona and worked with IBM in California. You have Claire Revekant, has worked as a biologist with 5 national wildlife refuge complexes and 1 national park. Presently, Claire is a senior wildlife biologist overseeing biological operations by addressing biological needs, seeking funding for biological actions, including water monitoring and habitat management. We have then also Dan Collins. He is the Regional Migratory Bird Biologist, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. In 2008, after earning his PhD, Dan was the Assistant to Pacific Flyway Representative in Portland, Oregon. In 2011, he moved to Albuquerque as the Migratory Bird Biologist, working in the Central and Pacific Flyway landscapes. He has been involved in research, monitoring the Rocky Mountain and Lower Colorado River populations of greater Sandhill cranes. He has extensive experience in surveying and monitoring, trapping and marking over 1,000 cranes, as well as many game birds in doing flyway surveys. And now I'm very proud to begin the program and start with Deb. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm, as Connie said, I'm Deb Caldwell, and I'm with the Friends of Bosque del Apache. And we say that we are a refuge not only for all seasons, but for all people. So if we go to the first slide, just to give you a little bit of an overview, which is what I'm going to do, is give you an overview of the refuge and an overview of the Friends. And then I'm going to turn it over to my biology experts that are on the call with me, Claire and Dan. So Bosque del Apache was established in 1939. And as the slide said, there's 57,331 acres, 33,000 of which are wilderness. And we are part of the last 2% of New Mexico wetlands. Bosque del Apache is a Spanish name, and bosque here is the ribbon of cottonwoods that run along the river. So bosque, meaning the woods, is actually cottonwood trees that run along the Rio Grande. And there were a lot of indigenous people in this area. The Apache were one of them, so hence the name, Bosque del Apache. And as the slide said, we are an oasis in the desert. We have 14 miles of tour loop, 43 miles of trails, and 12 hiking trails. There's a lot of different things you can do here in the land that we do have. One thing that usually surprises people, because we are a riparian area in the desert, is that we have the second highest bird count in the United States. We're currently up to 411 species of birds that have been seen. And of course, there's a lot of other species here as well. Elk, and we have a black bear that's been spotted. We have bobcats, a lot of other types of reptiles. So it's not just all birds here, but that's what we're known for. We have about 200,000 refuge visits a year. And this is a really important point that people don't often recognize, is that over the years, the federal government that puts money towards running the National Wildlife Refuge system, we've gotten at this refuge, it's gone down over the years, but let's say it's roughly about $2 million. And from that, we've had a local footprint of about $17 million. So I don't know too many places that you can invest and get about, 8 times the amount of benefit from the investment that you made. So even from an economic standpoint, National Wildlife Refuges are really treasures to our local communities and to the whole U.S. We've been voted in the top for best places to bird watch, and by Country Living, and also by USA Today. And although it is magical when you visit a beautiful place like Bosque del Apache, it doesn't happen by magic. We have a dedicated crew of amazing biologists and refuge staff that does maintenance to the trails, that runs the equipment, that floods the wetlands. So what the Rio Grande, the river that ran through this area, used to do, the staff has to replicate that and make it look like it would have looked long ago. So we had a once wild river, and now in order to grow food for the birds, in order to have wetlands, we have a very hardworking crew that makes that happen in order to make this a refuge for all seasons and for all people. So why do people visit Bosque del Apache? And all these pictures are of visitors and spots on the refuge. Obviously, people come and they bird watch and they drive the tour loop and they watch other wildlife. They might hike or bike, but also nature, as you're probably well aware, there's a real mental and physical health boost when you're in nature. You can find peace and rest, get rid of some of the anxieties of the day, and have fun and learn. And that's one of the things that I love, is I have a lot of different backgrounds in my career, but I've been here 10 years, and every day I learn something, and it's a beautiful place to be. So there is a lot of research. I won't quote it, but it is in the slides that I sent to Connie. So if you're interested and you get a copy of the slides, it will tell you where this research came from. But it's been shown that spending time outdoors can really lower your cortisol. It can bring up all the good endorphins and the hormones that help us to feel happy, which boost our immune system. And listening to birdsong has been proven to show that it has shown that we are less anxious when we're listening to birds. We kind of get out of our own way. We're in the present moment. So taking a time out and a break in nature really is a very good thing to do for your health. One of our birding experts that comes here and teaches often tells people birds are heart healthy. And I would say being in nature is healthy for all parts of your health. Here at Bosque del Apache, one of the things that the Friends do in conjunction with the refuge staff is we run at least one event per season. So we celebrate the spring migration of shorebirds and small birds, warblers, vermilion flycatchers, all kinds of beautiful birds. We celebrate them in the spring, and we have an upcoming festival for that, March 2nd through the 4th. In the summer, we run an event to celebrate pollinators. In the autumn, we have something called Wildlife Zone. We say it's for kids of all ages, and we have live raptors. We have some live animals up close and personal that the kids can see. And also our conservation partners are here, games for kids. And then finally in winter, we have our premier event, which is called the Festival of the Cranes. This year, it happens to be December the 3rd through the 7th, and it coincides with when the Sandhill crane migration is in, full bore. And we also get, snow geese and raptors during that season. So in case you're interested, we do have this event this year from the 3rd to the 7th, and we run birding events, photography events. The refuge runs tours to explain to people how the refuge looks like it does, how the refuge grows food, how the refuge has wetlands. You'll hear more about that from Claire and from Dan. And we also teach people about the local culture in our area, and we have fun game nights and a wonderful dinner. So this year we're going to have about 90 events, and out of that, about a third of our events are cost-free, and we're in our 36th year. So that's the good part of everything that goes on here. Of course, it doesn't come without its challenges. As I mentioned, we are part of the last 2% of New Mexico wetlands, and those wetlands are managed by refuge staff to create a mosaic of riparian habitats that were seriously in danger and are still, a challenge to maintain. And they're all along the Rio Grande. And we're part of a larger complex in the middle Rio Grande Valley. And not only is there water needed further north of us, some of our larger cities, but also to the south, we owe water to go into the Rio Grande and onto Texas for the compact. So it's always a challenge in the desert to have enough water to have the riparian areas for all the animals that depend on that here. And while with climate change, also the heat is increasing and we have evapotranspiration. So the water we do get doesn't last as well. And we have the staff here has to work very hard to maintain habitat. So the cost of that is getting greater at the same time that federal funding is less. So it really takes a lot to keep a place like this going and to provide the habitat for the animals that migrate here and the animals that live here. You're going to hear more from Claire and Dan about that. But I would say that, it's becoming more challenging as the government is less able to give more, the money that is needed to really do this. That's where the Friends come in. And so the Friends are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We do have a board of directors and we have staff, and it looks like we have a lot of staff. We actually don't. Only 2 of us are full-time and the rest are part-time. But we have a membership manager. We have somebody that helps us to manage some of our projects. We have our bookkeeper, just things to keep our own operations going. And my main job is fundraising, as is some of my staff. And we have, over the last few years, been able to raise $6 million in the last 32 years, about 3.5 of that in the last 10. So that's through having really active and loyal Friends members. And we have programs that people can be a Friends member for as little as $2 a month. And we have a lot of people that, donate at different levels. And that helps us to fundraise to fill the gap. As I mentioned, there's just never enough money for the federal government to cover everything. And last year, I would say probably 20 to 25% of the money needed for operations on the refuge came from the Friends organization. So this is just, I guess, a plug, not just for our National Wildlife Refuge here, but for national wildlife refuges everywhere. It's really important to be involved if we want these kinds of wonderful places to be there for us and to be refuges for animals, because we can't, it's up to us. It's up to us as citizens. It's up to us as community members. And with that, we also do bus scholarships so we can teach kids about nature. We put money towards interns. And we've also been running, the Friends are the lead, but we work with the refuge closely. We have a regenerative agriculture project going on to learn how to use cover crops to hold carbon and water in the soil better, to minimize our use of chemicals. And also we have a pollinator project that is statewide and we are a part of, to create more habitat and more trails in an area where people can learn about pollinators. And finally, as I mentioned before, how can each of us make a difference? How can you make a difference? Whether it's to our National Wildlife Refuge or whether it's to one in your area, spreading the word about the importance of people like this, of places like this, not only for us as people, but of course for the wildlife that are supported here. And as I mentioned before, there's a health boost for us. So it's a wonderful win-win when we give to places like this, becoming a friend, donating, advocating, visiting, coming to the events, and also volunteering. So if you want to know something more specifically about the Friends Org here, there is a website link there on the page for you. And I want to turn it over to Dan so we can now talk about the science that makes all of this work. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Share my screen here. Yeah, do you guys see my presentation in presenter mode?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Claire. Okie dokie. So yeah, I'm Dan Collins, and I've been with the Southwest region since 2011. And main part of my my priorities and work is to engage all the state agencies in the Central and Pacific flyways, make sure we have the monitoring and survey data to make informed harvest decisions as the game bird biologist. But I also am afforded the ability to engage in just basic and applied research. So a lot of the stuff that I'm going to present today is along these lines, and it helps to inform how we go about identifying where conservation measures are needed, what refuges may or may not need to do better or less of or more of. So I'm going to hit on those. It's not going to be everything, and then I'll turn it over to Claire. The one thing that I always like to do is acknowledge all of the partners. While I am here speaking about sandhill cranes in the West, I couldn't do any of this work without all of these agencies, universities, giving me and others support. So thank your state agencies, thank your NGOs that work in your local communities. They do a lot of the background work that might not be noticed. So one thing I do like to do, and we might just rip through this, but is a little bit of an icebreaker. And can anybody, or does anybody know the earliest fossil found of sandhill cranes? I'll take silence as a no. So it's in Florida. And so we go about banding cranes. Anybody want to guess on how old the oldest banded bird that was recovered might have been? You guys are a little muffled, so you might need to get closer to the mic or speak up. So 36 years old. Yeah.
We can't hear you, so if you could just skip the questions. I'm
Sure.
sorry.
We can't send back.
Yeah.
Yep. You're good. You're good. Okay, so today I'm going to focus on the data that I'm going to present is going to primarily be Rocky Mountain population data, but there's going to be a sprinkling of Lower Colorado River Valley data as well as Central Valley data. These are our three greater Western sandhill crane populations. And then you can think that mid-continent birds are in the area, but it's not going to be a focus of this presentation. Here's a really old map of the migratory populations of sandhill cranes that exist in North America. You guys have the eastern population, and in the west, and the yellow and the blue and the red are going to be those highlighted populations. So surveying, monitoring, research, work moving forward. These are the sort of the three things I'm going to talk about. And here in the West, there's a common theme, right? It's water scarcity, it's habitat fragmentation. Do we need to do supplemental feeding for a variety of different reasons? We have crop depredation complaints. So that's going to be what we talk about. But before we do that, there is a management plan for these birds at the flyway scale. So think of Texas up through North Dakota to west to Alaska. Those are your central and Pacific flyways. And we have population objectives for the RMPs. Right now, they're well above that 21,000 upper threshold. Their 3-year running average is just shy of 24,000 birds. But so we have things in place where we have things identified where information needs might need to be addressed. We have harvest strategies. We have all the things laid out in this management plan. One of the things that we do is a recruitment survey, spotting scopes, binoculars, get a ratio of young to adult. Hold on. So we fly, I'm sorry. So we fly surveys. Sorry for that hiccup. So we fly surveys in the Intermountain West. We fly them out of Idaho Falls and we hit these pre-staging areas and we basically count, it's a cruise style survey. We count the birds that we see on these staging areas. We enumerate and we get a population abundance estimate. We have reports that we put out. You can find them on the Fish and Wildlife Service website. If you're ever interested, you can find them other places too. If you just Google Western Sandhill Crane reports. Again, we do the recruitment survey where we can get an idea of how many adults are there to young of the year, and we know if recruitment has been good for that year, which goes into the population dynamics of that harvest strategy. So because it's a case selected species and we don't want to do more harm than good by offering harvest opportunities. We put out a report. Again, it's publicly available, so everybody knows sort of how things are going on. We put out a status report of all sandhill cranes, and that again can be found on the Fish and Wildlife Service website. If you're ever interested to know how well the eastern population is doing, I can tell you right now it's exponentially growing, so it's doing very well. And then just some of the things that you can see, this is the 3-year running average of the RMPs, and you can see it's sort of stable to slightly increasing. Recruitment has been very stable. So for a case selected species, it's important to see this because we know that harvest is not having a detrimental effect on these birds. Again, recruitment kind of bounces all over the place, but it's pretty good. It's what we want to see for this type of species. So that was just a real quick overview of how we go about handling harvest and the data streams that we use to inform harvest. And this is more of the meat of the presentation. I'm going to talk about population distribution and delineation. How do these birds respond to habitat management? How do they select and use that matrix on the landscape? And then just seasonal movements and migration strategies. And I'll try to tie that back to Bosque del Apache or just the Middle Rio Grande Valley itself. But just to give you an idea, through captures, we use rocket nets, we deploy GSM transmitters. So that's just a unit that when it turns on, it connects to the cell phone towers, closest cell phone tower, and it downloads all the GPS data. It gives us really fine scale data, like down to, I think, 18 meters of error. So it's, we know exactly where those birds have been standing, and then we process it through, all sorts of softwares that allow us to analyze it. So to date, 2 PhD students, 2 master students, I think we're getting close to 1,100 sandhill cranes banded in 8 states in the West. We have auxiliary markers, which allow us to have a passive way of resighting or relocating birds. And then we have over 158 GPS units that were out on landscape. Most of them are no longer working. So we have, well over 4 million points, GPS points and locations that you'll get to see here in a minute. So this is just a video of sort of the chaos that occurs upon capture. Basically you get to sit in a blind basically all day and wait for the birds to line up properly and then make the decision on when it's safe to shoot the net. And then it's just a mad scramble out to the net. And then we essentially, once we get there, assess the situation, make sure everything has worked properly. The process of getting these birds out from under the net, basically you get to sit in really cool locations like that, put fires out that might have caught on fire, caught the chaff on fire, work birds from out from under the net. You want to watch your eyes and you want to watch your chest. They're not exactly thrilled to be under a net being handled by a human. What we do is once we get them out, we put them in these bags. We tie Velcro up above their knees and it allows them to not flail around and they calm down. And then we just go through a series of measurements and handling. We try to limit the time that we have these birds in possession of ourselves because that just creates a little bit more stress on them. The one thing that we do is, we watch the temperature of their legs. That's the tell. If their legs start getting really hot, we just start ringing and flinging these birds. But this picture right here is an example of an auxiliary marker plus a lock-on band. That marker is read U94, and if U94 is then seen somewhere else and is reported to the bird banding lab, it gives me a report with a lat long, and we can basically start to connect dots of these birds' movements. That is a GPS unit that connects to the cell phone tower. That's just an example. And then once we're done, we walk them away from everybody. We put them down on their back. They pop up. They walk off. They are known to chase, and then they fly off. So using that GPS data as well as that auxiliary marker data, and as that data rolled in, we started to question, is this map currently accurate? Right? With this fine scale data, being able to pick up these birds every day, is it accurate? And are we maybe drawing the lines around these populations a bit too fine? So one thing we started to do and were able to do was we were able to pick up new breeding areas. So the state agency in Idaho now knows of these areas that they can put conservation measures. But we also started to pick up this intermixing. So that red dot there is a colt that we marked because its parents went to the Long Valley in Idaho. They were one of the parents was marked with the GPS unit, and it went to the Long Valley. It was marked in Arizona. The next year, they came down through Utah to the Middle Rio Grande Valley. So that was sort of our first hint that, these Western birds might not really be separate three populations. So we started to mark birds at a broader scale. We marked birds in northeastern Oregon. We marked more birds in Idaho. And what we started to see was even those two Western populations, there was intermixing that way too, both on the breeding grounds as well as on the wintering grounds, right? So in the West, if you think about how dry we are and these river systems, it looks like they're separate because the Great Basin, there's not a lot of wetlands in the Great Basin. So they sort of go around it and they have these distinct wintering regions. So we started to just think about this. So on the right-hand side is all the birds that we marked that we thought were associated with the Rocky Mountain population. The figure on the left is all the birds that we marked that we thought were associated with the lower Colorado River Valley population, right? And then that western side is all Central Valley birds. Now, when you look at it without any color scheme and just thinking about it as a species, to me as a biologist and looking at the landscape, that looks like one big breeding population that just has distinct wintering locations. And as we've dried, as rivers have started to be restricted and not working the way they should be, connections have been lost. But I think there's still genetic flow through those populations, and we are working on that part. But take a look at that left-hand side, and then this right-hand side is all sort of population designated birds. You can see, even though the sample size is not the greatest, you can see that there's intermixing going on. So the question is, are we managing these birds properly? Do we need to combine these populations and address the things that are going on at that population level, or do we still need to keep these as three separate populations? That's the old picture compared to what our GPS units are telling us now. You can see it's vastly different, in my opinion. So the next thing is response to habitat management. Some of the things that we've investigated is like, what are the nesting materials are they using in the West? How has wetland management influenced core nesting? Like if the wetlands are restricted, does that create a density of breeding birds, or is it just one or two pairs gets to use those wetlands and the others are kicked somewhere else? So it's like, how do we think about a refuge in a matrix of surrounded private property, how do we start to work with those private landowners in order to spread birds out and have the best habitat quality, both on public and private lands? And then one really important thing that we deal with in New Mexico is, and that was identified, was how important is corn to their diets and how much corn is needed. We had this nebulous, like 3.3 million pounds of corn were needed in the Middle Rio Grande Valley. And it started to get questioned because nobody could really find it in the literature. It was almost like it was that back of the napkin agreement that we needed 3.3 million pounds. So we really started to dive into that. And what we did was we started to do time activity budgets to figure out, what activities are they doing in these certain habitat types. So we picked alfalfa, wetlands, and corn. And we wanted to know, like, where are they using most of their time? And you can see for foraging, they spend a lot of time in corn and alfalfa and in wetlands. So then we started to think about, like, what are those outside of the cornfields? Like, what are those major food items that they might be looking for in those habitat types? And, chufa or yellow nutsedge is really important. Alkali bulrush was picked because of its carbon signature, and then alfalfa just was the obvious because they were in the alfalfa fields. I don't think they're eating alfalfa, but they use it quite a bit for the understory and bugs and those sorts of things in those fields. So we use those 4 species because of their carbon signature to do some isotope work, to look at, like, how important were these 4 things. And it really was to look at, like, a C3 signature versus a C4 signature. So in the valley, the C4 plants is corn and yellow nutsedge, and then everything else is going to be a C3 plant. So if we can collect the data that tells us when they're turning over from a C3 based diet to a C4 based diet, we know that C4 plants are the preferred forage item. And what we found was that 60% of their diet is made up of corn. So we have that first sort of feather in our cap to show that corn is really important in their diet. And then what we did was we paired this with migration timing. And that alone helps us give this information to refuges that basically they start to arrive early November, really kind of Thanksgiving time. And they're coming from the valley in Colorado, San Luis Valley, where it's C3 plants. The grains up there are all C3. So they're starting to turn over those C3 plants in their system and are really skewing towards C4. So refuges, state and federal refuges, now know we have corn on the landscape. We can create like a mowing schedule. We can make it available when they actually are starting to look for it. And that's just our data that, from our tissue derived samples versus our satellite samples. So essentially what we have suggested to the refuges is, like, right around December 1st is when they're really going to start to hit that C4 forage source. It's in the scientific literature. If you're interested, I can also send it along to you guys as well. And then it was a question of, is 3.3 million pounds of corn really needed? Corn is water intense. Certain places, for national wildlife refuges, we have restrictions on what we can use to grow the corn, control the weeds. So all the things that a farmer might be able to do, we might have restrictions in place. So what we did is we know the resting metabolic rate of these cranes, and we went through and started to develop these daily energy expenditures. The other thing about corn in the Middle Rio Grande is our cash crop is green chili. And when cranes get in the chili fields, if they knock them off the plant or if they defecate on them, it devalues that plant. So we had local producers basically complain to Congress, and Congress reached out to us. And back in the early 90s, that's why corn is now used as a management tool to keep birds off of local producers. So again, we know how many cranes on average are in the valley, and we use that daily energy expenditure model that we created to show that over the course of time, the corn really needs to be available January to February. So as they're preparing to migrate, they need that corn to put on those lipid reserves to then migrate and make it back with enough energy reserves in the tank to then start to breed almost immediately. They're not complete capital breeders, but they kind of split their time between it. So that again informs how the refuges can go about their habitat management when they can knock corn down, the other grains that they might grow, when water is on wetlands that might be heavy in chufa, those sorts of things. This is just another portrayal of sort of that when those kilocalories are really needed on the landscape. And so what we did is we took all this information, we put it into a very simple model, and we figured out that all the cranes, all the snow geese, all the waterfowl that are in the Middle Rio Grande Valley, based off of survey data, based off of our knowledge of how they're using the landscape, if we grow 2.2 million pounds of forage, it's enough to support these birds for 112 days. So February 14th around here, that's when birds start to get antsy and start to leave. And so if mid to late November through February 14th, we have enough forage to support these birds, keep them off of local producers for the most part, and support them throughout their entire overwintering period. And then just some are cranes using habitat in proportion to availability? What are the importance of these public landscapes versus private? I will tell you, it depends on where you are in the West. I'm just going to hit on this. Like, public land in the fall is more important than public land in the spring in the West because of water. So in the spring, a lot of producers are putting water on the landscape. They're flooding alfalfa. They're flooding their wet meadows for cattle. They're getting ready for that growing season. So there's this big fresh pulse of water going out on the landscape. Where in the fall, they're starting, water restrictions are being put into place. And that's when water on these public properties is super important for these birds to sort of make it through this system. And that really ties into how they're using this system and these seasonal movements and migration and these decisions that they're making. And just to give you an idea, this is a visualization of the crane data and sort of how they shotgun out across the landscape and, go through their annual cycle. This is, the LCRV data was first started to be collected. That's that young of the year. And, now the RMP stuff is starting to come out. And so you can see they avoid, the Colorado Plateau because there's not a ton of water. They avoid the Great Basin because there's not a ton of water. But where there is water, you can see they're starting to make these connections and these little like network nodes that are either important because of how much space there is between them or not so much because of how close together they are. And that is this picture right here. So the spring and the fall, the bigger the circle, the more important the area is. So if you look at this, Bosque del Apache, or the Middle Rio Grande Valley, is a fairly large circle in the spring. And it's not as big in the fall. And this is importance to cranes, not necessarily wetland dependent species itself. And I know this is counter to what I just said, but in the spring, bosque is important because of all those birds coming back from the south. But if you look at the latitudinal gradient, the San Luis Valley, which in my opinion is basically the pinhead of the Middle Rio Grande Valley in Colorado, and Lund area in Nevada, if those two areas blink out, it makes it really hard for these birds to move through their system and be successful. So if those areas go, we would see a slow decline in the population, we believe. So what we can do is we can give this to managers, area managers, in the San Luis Valley, there's Monte Vista, Alamosa, and Rio Grande, the refuges up there. We can say, hey, this is when you guys are important. Can you think about different habitat management schemes? And then just moving forward real quick, we're doing survey assessments. We're doing a large scale wintering habitat assessment to sort of really fine tune, where birds are using, what's really important to them, and using some of this data in ways that we can answer some additional questions that state agencies, refuges themselves might have for us. So I will give my time to Claire and answer questions when we're done.
And I'm gonna share my screen here. Just let me know what you can see. And then I'll move on.
I'm not seeing any. Oh, there it goes. Claire, we see your blue desktop. There you go.
All set?
All set.
Yes.
All right, cool. I'm gonna turn my camera on as well. Okay, everybody see me?
Yeah.
All right, so I'm just going to quickly go through just a little bit about myself so you can know a little bit more about my background and how I came to be here at Bosque. And then I'm going to talk about the refuge, our biological priorities, and connect with what we're doing here and the management actions that we're doing here on the refuge to Dan's talk to hopefully tie everything together. So just quickly, just a little bit about me. I'm from Rochester, New York. I'm an avid outdoorsman. I'm an aunt. I'm a dog mom. And I started working in the natural resource field with the Student Conservation Association. I did trail work for the National Park Service for 3 years. Went to school afterwards and got a degree in wildlife sciences. Found out about the Wildlife Society, and that really projected my career to where it's at now. I found out about the Fish and Wildlife Service while I was in grad school. The agency is really small, but I was really lucky to land an internship at Parker River, which is in Massachusetts. Moved over to Monomoy, which is still in Massachusetts, and I worked there for a few years with seabirds, and went through a lot of training, and I had a great time and really fell in love with working for the agency. I did leave because I was seasonal, and I worked for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation with American martin and fishers. But then eventually went back to federal employment and worked for Yellowstone, and then eventually for the Condor Recovery Program in California at Bitter Creek and Hopper Mountain, sorry. I went back to school and so I could learn more, and I got a master's in rangeland ecology and management. I have a stats minor. I studied sage-grouse predators in Wyoming, and that led me here to Bosque del Apache. I've been working here for a little over 3 years now, and I want to talk to you a little bit more about the refuge. So Bosque del Apache was established in 1939. We manage 3 federally designated wilderness areas. We provide a critical stopover site for migratory waterfowl, as Dan mentioned, and more specifically, we serve as wintering grounds for greater Sandhill cranes. So the refuge was established to serve as an inviolate sanctuary for migratory birds and other management purposes. The primary purpose of the refuge is to serve as a refuge for and breeding ground for various birds and other wildlife. So going into our biological priorities are different for every refuge. So the ones that I'll discuss today just align with Bosque del Apache. The biological priorities for each refuge aligns with their purpose and mission. So we're going to talk a little bit about those right now. In no particular order, we manage 4 biological priorities here at Bosque del Apache. The first one being we treat and we manage invasive species, and we monitor invasive species here on the refuge. We do that using a multitude of different techniques. We treat them mechanically, we treat them manually, we treat them chemically. And why we treat invasive species, why is it important? We treat it for habitat restoration. We manage listed species here on the refuge, and then, as you know, water birds. But we also treat invasive species to maintain infrastructure here on the refuge and to protect diversity and native species. So our mission for this biological priority is to manage invasive species on the refuge for the benefit of our trust resources. 2, we manage 4 federally listed species here on the refuge, and again, in no particular order. From left to right on the screen you see, we have the southwestern willow flycatcher, which was listed as endangered in 1995. Second picture being the New Mexico meadow jumping mouse, which was listed as critically endangered in 2014. The jumping mouse that we manage here, the population that we manage here, is the only known population here in the Middle Rio Grande Valley. It's a low elevation population. There's also high elevation populations of the jumping mouse. The third picture you see is the yellow-billed cuckoo. We manage the western distinct population here. So if you're familiar with the East Coast population that of the yellow-billed cuckoo, they're doing just fine. But the western distinct population here at Bosque was listed as threatened in 2014. And then the last picture you see on the right-hand side is the Rio Grande silvery minnow, which was listed as endangered in 1994. So we've got 2 birds, a mammal, and a fish, all are listed species that we manage here. It is our mission to implement management and monitor the effectiveness of the management actions to monitor the species occurrence for these 4 listed species. We have a special focus on the New Mexico meadow jumping mouse. Okay, 3, and this is where I'll go into a little bit more detail on how our management connects to Dan's talk. So 3, we monitor water use on the refuge. So water is life, as Dad mentioned in his talk. The cranes are going to follow the water. Their movements kind of align with where they're finding water on the landscape. We manage, Bosque del Apache is one of the only wetland areas in the Middle Rio Grande Valley. The state manages some wetlands, and then our sister stations also manage wetlands as well. So we serve as a really important stopover site and for these migrating birds. We manage water. Man, water is life. The picture that you see on the right-hand side, where there's that where's that red ditch that follows the north boundary down to the south boundary of the refuge, that's called our Riverside Canal. And that is what we refer to as the bloodline of the refuge. It helps us manage all of our wetland units on the refuge, and then the habitat that we manage for our listed species. So when we think about water management at Bosque del Apache being at the tail end of the system, we really have to think long and carefully about how we're going to utilize what precious water and what little water is coming through the refuge. So that's kind of going to be the theme for the next things that I'm going to talk about here in a second. So our 4th biological priority is we manage waterfowl and water birds. That's a big one for us. It's a year-round job. So just for some objectives here for this biological priority, we provide food and habitat for wintering waterfowl and water birds. So the refuge manages agricultural fields and moist soil units to provide feeding and resting habitat for wintering waterfowl and sandhill cranes. These actions are guided by what we call the waterfowl plan, or the long name for it is the Plan for Management of Waterfowl and Sandhill Cranes on Federal and State Lands in the Middle Rio Grande Valley of New Mexico. But again, we just refer to it as the Waterfowl Plan. And that plan you can find online. But the plan was developed through coordinated planning of the Middle Rio Grande Valley Waterfowl and Sandhill Crane Working Group. It was comprised of agency representatives from the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish and the Fish and Wildlife Service and APHIS Wildlife Services. It was signed in 2020. And in that plan, it lists our objectives for Bosque del Apache, and that is to manage 50% of the mid-continent population and Rocky Mountain population of sandhill cranes. We also manage 50% of the light geese that overwinter in the Middle Rio Grande Valley and 30% of the dabbling ducks that winter or stop over here in the Middle Rio Grande Valley. Now, those are objectives of ours, but of course the birds do not see boundaries. So what the birds that are utilizing the refuge, we will go out and we will do waterfowl counts to kind of get an idea if we're meeting those objectives. So how do we manage for that number of overwintering waterfowl here? We aim to grow 2.5 million pounds of native seed via moist soil management, and we also aim to grow 1.2 million pounds of grain crops that used to be corn. I'm going to touch on that last objective in just a second here. So first, I want to talk about moist soil. So moist soil management is a wetland management technique with the goal in mind of providing a diverse diet of plant and animal food sources that are critical for wintering and migratory waterfowl, including the ducks, the cranes, and the geese that I mentioned earlier. Moist soil requires well-timed management actions, including drawdown, flood up, and disturbance. On the right-hand side, you'll see this turntable, and that's really the where it says spring and fall on the bottom. That plan, rough plan, is what we follow year end and year out. I will say that we manage about 900 acres of moist soil, but that changes year to year depending on water availability, staffing, and funding. But I do want to go through this to help portray a picture of how we manage moist soil. So let's start in the spring. So that's what this slide is about. So tilling and disking. We call it disturbance. So you can see in the pictures, we use agricultural tractors and heavy equipment to disturb our moist soil units. That disturbance, overturning the soils, kind of helps reset the bank and pushes those seeds that are lower out in the seed bank, pushes them towards the top of the soil. And so as our units are growing less and less seed in them, we'll make it a priority, or we'll put it on our disturbance schedule to disturb those units. So it helps vitalize that seed bank. And then next year, we usually see a boom in our seed yield. We'll also use other techniques for disturbance like fire. So then if we move into later on in the spring, in like March, in April, and then into May, we have what we call spring drawdowns. Spring drawdowns are really important for managing moist soil because those drawdowns help promote germination, so that germination will start to occur as water recedes. And again, those drawdowns occur in late March into April and then into May. In the summertime, we're irrigating, and then we're also doing cocklebur treatments. So cocklebur, if folks are not familiar with that, I know I wasn't before I moved here. This picture to the right, the upper left-hand side, that's cocklebur. It's a member of the daisy family. It looks a lot like sunflower when it's young. It's non-native to New Mexico. However, it is naturalized. It provides almost no nutritional benefit to wildlife. The burrs are sharp, and for some animals, they're actually toxic to them. So we'll go do cocklebur treatments, again, using heavy equipment. In June and July, we'll mow it. We'll mow the cocklebur, and then we'll put water on those units and hold water on those units for 4 or 5 days, and that kills the cocklebur. Then we'll drain that water, and what we usually see as a response to that treatment is the growth of desirable plants that the ducks, the cranes, and the geese feed on. In August, we do what we call seed yield surveys. So in that lower picture with that staff member, they have that PVC square. We'll go do seed yield surveys so we can calculate the success of our moist soil management for the year. And that happens in August. We start doing them in August, and then that goes into September. Okay, and then we have fall and winter time. That's the fall time is when we take our mowers and we go and we mow these units into mosaics, or we do slick off, or we slick the units from the vegetation that we grew all year in our moist soil units. So you can see an example of both of those in the pictures provided. And then in the winter time is when we start flood up. So again, spring, we have spring disturbance, spring drawdowns. In the summertime, we do cocklebur treatments and we irrigate those fields similar to how you would irrigate a farm field. In the fall, we mow, and sometimes we'll do disturbance then as well. And in the winter time, we flood those units and we make that seed available to the water birds as they arrive. And then the process just repeats itself. When it comes to flood up, we don't want to flood units up all at the same time. As Dan mentioned, the birds start arriving in the fall, and then they usually leave in February or March. So we want to be able to provide food during the entire winter months, fall into winter months. So we'll strategically flood up units. We're also thinking about disease management when we create our flood up schedule. So we have a refuge that extends about 12 or 13 miles, and we have our moist soil units that extend from the north boundary to the south boundary. So when we're thinking about flood up, we're thinking about how much food do we need to provide for the birds at this time. And again, we get that information from our waterfowl surveys. And then we're also thinking about disease management. So we want to flood up units that are at the north end, also in the middle of the refuge, and then at the south end, so we help spread the birds out and reduce the spread of disease. And the last thing we're thinking about is wildlife observation for the public. So again, we want to make sure we're providing wildlife observation opportunities along the tour loop, but then we provide refuge for this wildlife in areas that are close to the public, so they can remove themselves from human disturbance if they need that. And then this is what flood up looks like. So as you can see, the ducks and the cranes, they like to feed along the edge of the water. So like as we flood up and water enters a refuge, enters the unit, that seed that has fallen to the ground will start to float, and it will be carried to the edge of the water. And that's why we see these birds feeding on the edge of the water. So when we flood up, it's also a very calculated, well thought out process. We want to make sure we're flooding the unit up slowly and not too quickly, not too slowly. So that way the birds stay interested in feeding in the units, and we're not just pushing that seed to the edge of the unit and then have it go into the ditches and out of the system. So farming, I just want to touch on a little bit here. So the Bosque del Apache used to cooperatively farm for many years, but those cooperative farmers left their agreements in 2017, and so we switched to forced account farming. But unfortunately, due to shifting priorities and staffing and budget, the refuge is going to focus more on moist soil management and move away from farming practices for the time being. That said, we will continue to evaluate its capacity to farm on an annual basis. I just wanted to mention that because I know that Dan talked about corn. So the refuge was growing corn when it was cooperatively farming and during forced account years. But we found that the corn that we were trying to grow here on the refuge was, we were struggling to grow it. We were getting really low yield. We also have problems with pest management, sorghum earworm more specifically. And so a couple years ago, we switched to growing sorghum milo and then triticale. And if folks don't know what triticale is a wheat rye hybrid that the cranes and the geese gravitate to. And then milo has we've seen them respond well to milo as well. Milo is more salt tolerant, it's more drought tolerant. Again, being at the tail end of the system here, our soils are really salty. Our water quality is currently being assessed, but it's really dry down here. So we needed to find an alternative to corn so we could still grow a yield that would support the water birds that are overwintering here and stop over and use this area as a stopover. If you want to know more about corn, I know that we're running low on time, but there are these 2 articles that the Friends helped us publish. Please take a look at them. It's on their website. Just wanted to mention that. And then a couple more things. We do a lot of work here at Bosque del Apache. So I think Deb mentioned this in her talk. Every day we go out and we emulate the Rio Grande River. It's a tough job and it requires a lot of helping hands. We do a lot of work here. We support researchers. We collaborate with researchers here. We conduct wildlife surveys to help inform our management. We support a spring youth turkey hunt. We restore habitat using multiple tools, like I said, heavy equipment and fire. We also have this really interesting project going on. It's called the Lower Rio Grande River Realignment Project. It's a multi-year, multi-agency project with the Bureau of Reclamation. The study area is 1,000 acres, 3 river miles, and the point of the project and the goal of the project is to reduce flooding and protect infrastructure, meet water delivery goals, and to restore habitat for federally listed species. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit in case anybody has any questions. This project was started 6 years ago, so we're in year 6 of the project. And again, the point of this project is to help deliver water to Texas. So it's managed by the Bureau of Reclamation, supported by the state. But because it's on refuge property, we manage the restoration side of the project after the work was done to realign the river. So just again, just to give you a visual of what we're doing on the left-hand side, you see a picture of dense salt cedar. On the right-hand side is the work that we, the refuge, are doing to remove that salt cedar. I want to give a shout out to the Friends for supporting this work as well. And our goal is to not let it look like what it does on the right-hand side, that this work was only just recently done. Like I said, we're in year 6, but eventually over the next 4 or 5 years, you'll see those cottonwood galleries fill in with willow, our hope is for it to fill in with desirable plants that are going to support southwestern willow flycatcher and yellowbill cuckoo. So there will be a mid-story and an understory in there. So some challenges that I just want to mention. We have water. Like I said, water is life here, and water is constantly on our mind. Challenges remain within our water delivery system due to being at the tail end of the middle Rio Grande Valley, or being at the tail end of the system. We manage water through irrigation ditches, which limits the refuge's water use to what is readily available. We have vegetation plugs because the water is managed through these ditches and canals. And then we have competing priorities, like how do we use what little water we have? We get whatever water we get being at the tail end of the system. So we have to make sure we're trying to manage it for our listed species, for our moist soil units, for farming. There's only so much water to go around. And just to give you an example of what the system looks like now, the picture on the top is what the Rio Grande River looked like about 40 years ago. And then the bottom picture is what it looks like in the past decade here. So the state has channelized the river through the construction of what's called the low flow conveyance channel. And then again, that helps with water delivery down south. We also have disease here on the refuge, cholera outbreaks. We've tested positive for avian influenza and pox, but those are all managed here on the refuge, and we take precaution to make sure that we mitigate for disease outbreaks here on the refuge. I mentioned earlier that when we flood up our moist soil units, we're flooding it up across the entire refuge and not congregated just in one area. So that's an example of what we might do. We also have a lot of invasive species here in the refuge. Salt cedar is a big one, perennial pepperweed, parrot feather, which is that parrot feather is on the right-hand side. It's a plant that was introduced through the aquarium trade. And then we have American bullfrogs, which again are native to North America, but they're naturalized here. They're not native to New Mexico, and those cause issues for managing some of our listed species like the New Mexico meadow jumping mouse, since they use similar habitat. And then salt cedar removal. Salt cedar was planted for a really long time. Takes a lot of water. It takes a lot of space. It's non-native here, and it's not something we need here on the refuge. So we have spent a considerable amount of time, even since I've been here, working at Bosque to remove salt cedar, and that's a huge endeavor, and huge expensive endeavor, and time-consuming endeavor. Similar to Dan, I also want to thank the people who make the work here possible. So this is our staff on the right-hand side. We work really closely with the Bureau of Reclamation. We collaborate and work with different universities here in the Valley, such as UNM, University of New Mexico, and New Mexico Tech, which is just down the road from us. We work with other agencies, but most importantly, I want to mention the Friends of Bosque del Apache. They are our biggest supporters and our biggest advocates, and we would not be able to operate without their assistance. They are the reason why we're continuing our farm program here at Bosque through the Johnson Sioux Project, which Deb mentioned. And if anybody has any questions about that, I'm more than willing to answer some questions. But I do want to thank all of the staff and all of the people that we collaborate with, especially the Friends of Bosque del Apache. I also want to thank all of our interns and our volunteers. They are pivotal in making this place run. And again, that we just cannot do this work without them, and they're great. And with that, we'll take any questions.